If you've been told you have FAI bone shapes, you've got hip impingement or femoroacetabular impingement, and you notice that your hip pain gets worse when you're lifting weights or when you're under load, then you may be wondering whether it really is because of the bone shapes. I actually got an email from somebody a little while ago who said, I've been diagnosed with FAI, I have trouble understanding why I feel pain on my hip though, because I'm able to squat down pretty good. I can squat down with a 50-pound dumbbell or a 45-pound bar pretty good as well. Once I get to squatting heavier with 90 pounds or more, it begins to hurt a lot. It hurts in the front of my left hip and upper leg area, and I don't understand why it hurts more with more weight if I'm doing the same movement. So to be really clear, this person is able to do squats without any issue. Can get down, doesn't hurt. From the side, they get down, doesn't hurt, no problem, as long as it's less than 90 pounds. But as soon as it goes to a heavier weight, it becomes a problem. And now his doctors have said, well, that's simply because of the bone shapes. The bone shapes are bad. When you put more weight on it, that's why it hurts. This, however, makes some weird logical leaps that disregard the anatomy and disregard the physical reality of what's going on. So if we're saying it's the bone shapes, we're saying that the bone shapes are causing the hip joint to lock up prematurely. You're running into something. The bones are running into the bones, and that's it. However, that means that you should see that even without significant difference with load strains, right? You should be able to notice that it's actually locked up in there. Now, there's a couple problems with this theory, which I discuss in other videos, which I will link to. The biggest problem, of course, is that the bone shapes are not linked in any scientific study to actual range of motion problems. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is when you go and you can do a squat like this guy can, and it doesn't hurt, you also need to realize what's allowing this motion. When you're going into this motion, your hip bones are not staying locked and glued in. It's actually been shown that when you go into a deep squat, there's actually some excursion from the joint. So the ball actually moves a little bit out of the socket. So as you go down, the femur is actually gliding a little bit out of the joint, okay? And the hamstrings, the muscles all around the hip, the glutes, even the quads, the adductors, the abductors are all helping guide this motion and then recover from the motion. So it's not like the bones are just locked into this relationship. It's the muscles around the bones that control the bones that allow you to get down there without pain, without discomfort, and then back up. Keep in mind also that bones contacting one another is not a guarantee of pain. There have been several studies, large-scale studies done where people with severe arthritis, meaning bone-on-bone changes in their x-rays, don't experience pain. That's true in the knee, that's true in the hip. They have bone-on-bone x-rays showing that the knee joint is without cartilage and completely blasted, and they don't have any symptoms, no range of motion problems, no pain problems. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about this and squatting. So we can rule out basically that bone shapes are the big issue. They do not seem to correlate with range of motion problems or pain. So we do know though, muscles allow for the motion, control the motion as we go down into this squat. So what happens when we are doing this with no weight? No weight is one thing. That means the muscles have to work in a particular way, but they're not having to work quite as hard, and the forces on them are not quite as great. But what happens if you start adding weight? What happens if you take something and you throw it onto your back or you hold it in front of you? Well, now you're asking for those muscles to do a little bit more work. That means that the load is higher, the work that the muscles have to do is more, and if the muscles are not all able to do it in concert well, you're going to end up with pain. So a perfect example of this that I've seen for myself is just weak hip muscles. I've had problems with snapping and popping and just aching in the inner thighs, and I've seen that in clients too. At Upright Health, we've seen that with a bunch of people. When these muscles get too weak and they're not actually able to control the femur, a lot of times these weak muscles will pinch and snap and feel really painful. The same will happen with the hamstrings. If they're weak, if they're really stiff and inflexible, all these types of issues will start to manifest as uncontrollable problems with the femur. So you'll go into a squat and your knees bow out, or you'll go into a squat and your knees go in, or you just can't seem to find a comfortable squatting position because the muscles all around the hip don't work well together. For me personally, I've had basically everything be too weak or too stiff or too tight. And it's just been a process of gradually unwinding all those little issues. And that's how it is for pretty much everybody that we've seen with FAI. It's a long process of figuring out what the key issues are for you, and then gradually expanding your capabilities, gradually expanding your range of motion, and gradually teaching your muscles how to get better and better. Now, if you find that this email resonates with you, that you notice like, hey, when I squat, it's painful only with load, then you want to be looking at what's happening when you're going down into the squat. This will just be an easy thing to see in the mirror, or you can think about it. Just use your proprioceptive sense. If you're going down and you feel like, oh, it's hurting, you can kind of play with the idea of what happens when I go one way or the other. Is it, oh, worse this way? Is it a little better if I go out this way? And use that information. Think about, what does that mean? If I go down and I come out and it feels a little bit better, does that mean that I'm potentially weak here? Does that mean I'm inflexible out here? So the direction of preference may be telling you something that you can work on. When we have the self-test in the FAI Fix program, we're trying to get people to identify some of these issues for themselves and then start working on building up strength in multiple directions on their hips. So it's helpful to use the squat or any other functional test as a way to identify your preferences and your abilities. In terms of the squat, since we're talking about it, when you're going down, if you are feeling that pinch, we have a bunch of videos on this that I will link to down below in the description box, and hopefully I'll remember to put it in the comments. And it'll help you start figuring out how to get rid of some of that hip pinching and just help you allay some of your concerns about bone on bone, FAI, hip impingement, damage, blah, 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 blah. You should know that it is possible to get your muscles to work better. It just takes time, and a lot of times, especially if you're a weightlifter, it means you have to adjust what you're doing and potentially stop lifting such heavy weights for a while you regain range of motion. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it's really important that you hear that. So if you do have these hip impingement issues, you're lifting weights and you're wondering like, what can I do to help myself? Be sure to check out the links. Also check out the FAI Fix at thefaifix.com. And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.